Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This episode we will be concentrating solely on the blueprints in Satisfactory. I wouldn't call this a tutorial segment as I don't know enough about the game to call it that, but perhaps there will be some tips for you to learn from this episode. If watching this you feel like you have been lost in time and space, do not fret. I'm combining footage from different times and places to make this video for you. When I learned that blueprints were going to be added to the game, I was quite excited about it, but I did not get to test them out until the release version. I had not watched any tutorials on them, as such my initial reaction of them was of frustration. This was mainly due to the snapping features of the blueprints. They did not seem to snap to the foundations I had created on the world grid. I had also forgotten about notching the building holograms, so I nearly gave up on them. Any surprise that Reddy finally came to the rescue and I learned the tips I needed to make the blueprints work. And here I am sharing those tips to you and adding a few of my own to the mix. My expectations were that the blueprints would snap to world coordinates and foundations would snap to each other, or that you could define the snapping point yourself. Instead, the snapping functions with a more simplistic system. The snapping point of the blueprint is on the bottom level of the design. The blueprint also snaps by default a little off to the world coordinates, but more about that later. So, let's start with the basics on how the system works. You need a large even surface for the blueprint building, as it is a huge building. It also doesn't need power despite having electrical screens. The bottom of the blueprint building has a grid pattern on the floor to help in placing items on it. The Mark I has a size of 4 full foundation tiles by 4 foundation tiles on the bottom, with a height of 32 meters in foundation tiles. Also, there is room to have more pieces added to the side of the foundation, despite them being outside the floor built grid. The screen side of the blueprint building is considered the front side. This is indicated by an arrow when building the blueprints themselves. Once you have designed something on the blueprint building, you can save it by opening the screens and pressing the save button. The screens also has various other options. For example, you may load an existing blueprint to the build platform. You must have the building materials for it though. This allows you to edit already existing blueprints with ease. The screen also has a button to clear the building of anything built on it. The building materials will be placed to a box right next to the screens. When saving a blueprint, you may give it a name, a description, you may set its directory where it will be saved, and you can give it a special icon and select the background color for it. This all helps in separating all the different blueprints from each other, and by separating them in different directories and categories, you can easily select different ones to build and switch between them. Speaking of blueprints and switching between them, you can switch between different blueprints that are in the same category by pressing the E key. This works the same way as anything else on the build menu. You can also hold the E key to open up the wheel selector. The building mode has been expanded to have both the default mode and then the blueprint mode. The default mode tries to align and snap the blueprint to the existing buildings, whereas the blueprint looks for nearby built blueprints to snap to. Deconstruction mode has also been expanded to have a blueprint mode. You may delete parts of the model in default mode, same as usual, but if you want to delete the whole blueprint model you have created, you may choose to do so by switching the blueprint deconstruction mode by pressing the R key. As I mentioned earlier, snapping to objects can be a real pain. Snapping is really difficult at times, and when working with large models and tight spaces, it can be very frustrating to get everything in place. This is a good time to remember that you can lock the blueprint hologram in place by pressing the H key. The hologram can then be released by pressing the H key again. While the hologram is locked, you can nudge the hologram around by pressing the arrow keys. Note that you can only nudge the hologram around a small distance from its original position, but it really helps in lining up the models. Also take note that you cannot nudge the model in the Z-axis, so if you have placed the model on the wrong height, you have to release the hologram and try adjusting the height again. A couple of things to mention. When you're building with the blueprint mode, the models will try to snap with their center points, and that is calculated depending on the model being built. So for example here, the pillars should line up as they are on the designer, but because the bottom builder does not use the whole build area, the pillars are not lining up. Oh, and if you're planning on making ramps up is easy. However, making downward ramps is going to be a little bit more difficult. My advice is to temporarily add some foundations on the bottom of your designated build area and lining up the downward ramp with these. Before I end this, I would also mention that there are Mark II and Mark III blueprint designers on the game. Both of them increase the build volume by 8 meters in all directions. So Mark II has a build volume of 40 meters on each side, and Mark III has a build volume of 48 meters on each side. And I believe that has exhausted my quite limited knowledge of the blueprints so far. Happy gaming everyone, and let's get back to the regular gaming videos. Bye for now.